Okay, let's unpack this. There's something buzzing around online right now. Maybe you've seen it popping up on social media or heard friends talking about it.
Hmm.
It's a specific date and a potential um, large disaster linked to it, July 2025 in Japan.
Right. The specific date keeps coming up.
But what really makes this particular prediction stand out, I think, is its source. It's not coming from, a government agency or a
No,
seismologist.
nothing like that.
It's attributed to a popular manga artist known for keeping a dream diary.
It's certainly captured the public imagination, hasn't it?
Yeah.
This taps right into that deep, ancient well of human fascination with peering into the future,
Yeah.
especially when that future feels uncertain or potentially threatening, like the possibility of a major natural disaster.
Absolutely. And thanks to source material a listener shared with us, that's exactly what we're going to dive into today.
Great.
We'll explore this specific prediction, its origins, why it's gained so much traction, and then we're going to shift gears a bit and look at the broader, more fundamental question of why we humans are so drawn to predicting the future at all, even when, let's be honest, our track record isn't exactly perfect.
Far from it, often. But the impulse remains. It's a journey from a specific intriguing claim to the enduring human drive behind it all.
Yeah, exactly. It feels like a story as old as civilization itself, that yearning to know what tomorrow holds.
It really does.
So let's start with the source of the prediction itself. The material points us to a manga artist named Tatsuki Ryo.
Tatsuki Ryo.
Her visions are detailed in her book titled Watashi ga Mita Mirai, which translates to My Seen Future.
Now, this isn't a book that just came out yesterday. The original version was actually published way back in 1999.
Right, over 2 decades ago.
Exactly. And the reason this specific prediction from the book is getting so much buzz now, it ties back to something on the cover of that original 1999 manga.
Okay, here's where the story really gets interesting then.
Hmm?
That 1999 cover prominently displayed the date March 2011.
Yeah, just right there on the cover.
And as we all know, March 2011 is when Japan experienced the devastating Great East Japan earthquake and tsunami.
A truly catastrophic event.
So when that happened, many people looked back at the 1999 cover and saw that date and immediately made this powerful, almost eerie connection.
You can imagine that perceived connection, whether it was intended as a literal prophecy or maybe just a symbolic date, it absolutely propelled the book into a new kind of public awareness.
Gave it an almost oracle-like status for some, I suppose.
You could say that. This attention just intensified when a complete edition of the book was released more recently in 2021, revisiting and highlighting these precognitive dreams.
And it's in this 2021 complete edition that the specific July 2025 prediction appears, right?
That's the one.
Yeah.
The dream detailed in the complete edition foresees what's described as a real great disaster occurring in July 2025.
A real great disaster. What does the vision describe?
It's quite vivid, apparently. It involves something explodes on the seabed halfway between Japan and the Philippines.
An explosion. Okay.
And this explosion is followed by a great tsunami expected to hit Japan's Pacific coast.
Wow. And does it give any sense of the scale?
It does. The description adds a detail that really underscores the potential severity. The tsunami is expected to be far exceeding Nankai Trough earthquake assumptions.
Okay, the Nankai Trough. That's a known risk zone, isn't it? Experts do expect a big one there eventually.
Precisely. The Nankai Trough is a major known subduction zone off Japan's southern coast. Scientists do anticipate a massive earthquake and tsunami there in the future. It's a well-studied high-risk area.
So claiming this predicted event will exceed the scale expected from that area.
It's a significant detail. It naturally heightens concern and grabs attention. It paints a picture of something potentially catastrophic beyond even the worst-case scenarios currently modeled for that region.
And you can see how much this has resonated. The source mentions the book has sold over 1 million copies.
1 million copies, yeah.
And translated versions exist, spreading this vision beyond Japan. That kind of widespread interest, especially for something so specific and, let's say, unconventional, it speaks volumes about how these ideas catch fire.
That level of virality for a 20-plus-year-old manga based on dreams is truly remarkable. It really highlights that underlying human desire, maybe need, to find patterns and warnings in the world around us.
Even in unexpected places.
Sometimes, especially in unexpected places.
But, of course, not everyone is accepting this prediction at face value. What's the reaction from more conventional sources, like scientists?
Well, as you'd expect, the scientific community, particularly seismologists and oceanographers, they're quite clear on this. Their analysis relies on empirical data, geological models, established physics.
The scientific method, basically.
Exactly. And from their perspective, there's simply no scientific basis to predict a specific date-bound event of this nature. An explosion on the seabed in that exact location causing a tsunami of that magnitude on that specific date. It's just not something current science can forecast.
So dreams, however vivid.
While fascinating from maybe a psychological standpoint, they just don't fit within the framework of scientific forecasting for earthquakes or tsunamis.
Makes sense. And the source also mentions a specific spiritualist, Iguchi Hiroyuki, who got kind of caught up in this buzz.
Yes, that's an interesting side note. There were claims circulating online, apparently, that Iguchi Hiroyuki had also made a similar prediction for July 2025.
Okay.
But he's publicly and quite forcefully denied these claims. He stated they are simply lies and that he has made no such prediction whatsoever.
Huh. What I found particularly insightful was his perspective on why this prediction has become so widespread. He had a term for it.
Yes. He characterizes the phenomenon as 2025 business.
2025 business. What does he mean by that?
He suggests that a significant part of the traction is driven by commercial interests. People leveraging the date and the fear around it to, well, sell books, gain followers, generate ad revenue.
Essentially turning the fear into a commodity.
That's the implication, yes.
Yeah.
Turning the anxiety into clicks and sales.
And he takes that idea even further, suggesting a kind of feedback loop, almost.
He does. He worries that the intense collective focus and fear surrounding a negative prediction, people constantly thinking July 5th, could potentially contribute to something negative happening.
Not necessarily the predicted disaster, but something.
Maybe something else, yeah. By strengthening what he calls a collective negative nen.
Nen, what's that?
He describes nen as thought, will, or intention. So his idea is that this concentrated negative thought energy could potentially manifest something undesirable.
Interesting. So his advice is...
His advice is basically to stop thinking about it. Stop focusing on that date precisely to avoid giving it that collective negative energy.
That's a fascinating blend, isn't it? A spiritual perspective mixed with an almost social psychological observation.
It really is. It moves beyond just the physical prediction itself to consider the impact of the prediction on the collective mood, the collective psyche, and potentially, in his view, on reality itself.
And that idea, that our collective focus might influence things, it feels less about geology and more about psychology or maybe even history.
Definitely.
And that brings us really nicely to the deeper question this source material explores. Why do we, as humans, keep trying to predict the future, especially uncertain events like disasters, even when our attempts, well, often fall short?
This really is the core human impulse at play here, isn't it? The source material discussing the nature of future prediction delves into several layers of this drive, and it reaches back millennia.
One obvious reason, I guess, and maybe the most practical, is the potential for advantage, right? If you can see what's coming.
You can prepare. You can profit. You can avoid harm. It's basic survival and strategy.
Yeah.
The source uses a very pointed example. Queen Elizabeth II visiting the London School of Economics shortly after the 2008 global financial crisis hit.
Oh, right. I remember hearing about this.
She famously asked the assembled economists, some of the brightest minds, in essence, why did none of you see this coming?
Wow. That must have been an awkward moment. What was the takeaway from the experts?
Well, the British Academy later offered a response. They highlighted the complexity of modern financial systems naturally, but a striking phrase they used was that a major factor was a failure of collective imagination.
A failure of collective imagination, not just bad models, but an inability to even conceive of that possibility.
That's the sense of it. It wasn't just individual models being wrong, but maybe a systemic inability or perhaps an unwillingness to fully grasp the interconnected risks. It just illustrates that even with highly sophisticated methods and vast amounts of data, predicting complex systems with accuracy is incredibly difficult.
Yet we still strive for that advantage. We keep trying.
We do, because ultimately predicting helps us make decisions, right? We're constantly choosing paths in the face of the unknown.
Totally. Every little thing.
Precisely. Every action we take, or even the decision not to take action, is based on some level of anticipation or expectation about what might happen next.
Like, do I leave the house with an umbrella? That's a micro prediction about the weather.
Exactly. Do you invest your money? That's a prediction about future market performance. Predictions, whether conscious or unconscious, are fundamental inputs into our decision-making process, big and small.
But beyond the purely practical, the source also points out a more ancient need, maybe a spiritual or psychological one, that prediction fulfills, like coping with anxiety and finding meaning.
Absolutely. Think about the ancient world. Societies faced immense uncertainty, disease, famine, war, natural disasters, often without our modern scientific understanding.
Life was incredibly precarious.
Immensely. And prediction and prophecy, delivered by oracles or religious figures, served a vital psychological and social function. The Oracle of Delphi in ancient Greece is a classic example.
Right, the famous oracle at Delphi. Consulted for centuries.
Yes, for over 1,000 years. And the source notes something key about these oracles. Their pronouncements were often vague or delivered in ambiguous ways. They needed interpretation by priests.
So not exactly specific stock tips?
Not at all. And that vagueness wasn't a bug. It was a feature. It allowed the prophecy to be applied after the fact to fit whatever actually happened.
Ah, so it always seemed right in hindsight.
Pretty much. It maintained the oracle's authority. And sometimes they also served quite practical political purposes, helping guide policy or justify actions based on information the priests might have gathered through other means.
So in times of uncertainty, people turn to these sources for a narrative, a sense of control, maybe just a way to understand their place in the flow of events.
Exactly. And you could draw a parallel, perhaps, between that historical need for guidance and how we today turn to ex-pollsters, economic forecasters,
Or even rely on complex algorithms and AI.
right, to help us make sense of overwhelming information and anticipate trends. The methods change drastically from trance-induced pronouncements to, algorithmic analysis. But that underlying human desire for a framework, a narrative about the future that helps us navigate uncertainty, that remains remarkably consistent.
And prediction can also be a tool for just thinking things through, right? Like intellectual exploration, preparing for possibilities, even if you don't necessarily believe one specific outcome is certain.
Exactly. This is where concepts like scenario planning come in, which are used a lot in business and government.
Scenario planning.
Yeah. Large organizations like the oil company Shell famously used scenario exercises decades ago. They weren't trying to predict the future with certainty.
So what were they doing?
They were exploring multiple plausible futures to challenge their own assumptions about energy markets, geopolitical shifts, environmental regulations, things like that. It was about stress testing their strategies and building resilience.
Like sketching out wildly different possibilities. What if oil prices skyrocket? What if renewables take over way faster than expected? Just to see how they'd need to adapt.
Yes, precisely that. Military strategists do this constantly, planning for various potential conflicts or threats. Disaster management involves predicting different scales and types of events to build preparedness plans, stock supplies, train response teams.
It's a crucial form of proactive thinking, then. Less about foretelling fate and more about building robustness, being ready for whatever might happen.
Very much so. It's about preparing for inherent uncertainty.
Okay, this brings us to a really fascinating concept mentioned in the source, particularly relevant when we talk about social predictions: reflexivity.
Ah, reflexivity. Yes, that's the idea that a prediction itself can actually influence the outcome it is trying to predict. The act of forecasting changes the environment being forecasted. It's a kind of loop.
Okay, hang on. Like, if you predict a run on a bank, and because people hear that prediction, they panic and pull their money out, causing the run.
That's the classic example of a self-fulfilling prophecy. The prediction creates the conditions for its own fulfillment. It's not just about the prediction being right, it's about the prediction making itself right through its impact on human behavior.
Wow. But could it work the other way? Like, predicting a bad outcome might make people take action to prevent it?
Precisely. That's what's called a self-destroying prophecy. If a weather forecast predicts a severe hurricane, and people evacuate based on that warning.
The prediction might save lives.
Exactly. The warning changed behavior, altering the outcome. The prediction was successful, precisely because the worst outcome it described didn't happen due to the actions taken. This is also really relevant in things like international relations.
Well, so?
Well, predicting that a rival country is hostile might lead you to arm yourself more heavily, but the rival might then interpret your arms buildup as a threat.
Leading them to arm themselves, making things more tense.
Exactly. It escalates tensions.
Yeah.
It's known as the security dilemma, and it's driven by this reflexive loop of prediction and reaction.
So the key insight here really is that simply talking about a potential future event, even one based on a dream, like the July 2025 prediction, can actually alter the landscape.
It can. It can influence people's actions, their collective mood, their willingness to prepare, maybe even impacting the likelihood of related events or, as Iguchi suggested, the collective nen or energy around it.
So the prediction isn't just about passively seeing the future, it becomes an active force in the present that can shape what happens next.
It fundamentally challenges that idea of the future as something entirely separate and determined, just waiting to happen to us.
Yeah.
It shows how our engagement with potential futures can feed back into the present reality.
Okay. So bringing all these threads together then, the intense interest in this July 2025 prediction, even with all the skepticism from experts, it feels like a perfect illustration of these deep human drives we've been talking about.
It absolutely does. It speaks to our innate need to find order in chaos, to feel some sense of preparedness when faced with uncertainty, and yeah, to create narratives about what might come next.
And major natural disasters like earthquakes and tsunamis, they represent some of the most profound uncertainties we face, right? So it's maybe not surprising that predictions about them resonate so strongly.
It makes psychological sense. Whether the prediction comes from a spiritual vision, a dream, an ancient text, or a complex computer model, the source suggests they can all serve a similar psychological role.
Providing some form of guidance, maybe? Or just a framework for contemplating the unknown, helping us manage our anxiety about it all.
Exactly. And it's important to circle back to the manga author's stated intention, as noted in the source material. Tatsuki Ryo herself has indicated that the purpose of sharing these dreams, particularly in the updated edition,
What did she say it was?
she said it's meant to serve as a warning, to encourage readiness and preparation among her readers.
Readiness and preparation. So regardless of whether the specific date or event she dreamed of ever manifests, that message of preparedness, just thinking about potential risks and taking steps to be ready, it seems like a genuinely valuable takeaway for anyone engaging with this phenomenon.
It encourages a proactive stance rather than just passive fear or speculation.
Yeah.
And understanding why we are so drawn to prediction and the potential impact of those predictions themselves. This whole idea of reflexivity, perhaps, that can help us channel that energy towards constructive preparation and resilience rather than getting lost in fear.
So that leaves us with a thought to ponder, doesn't it? Something building on that idea of reflexivity we just discussed. If our very act of thinking about the future and the kind of future we actively envision and prepare for can actually influence what happens, what kind of future should we choose to collectively focus our thought, our will, our nen on?
Yeah.
Should it be one defined by fear of potential disaster? Or one built on proactive preparation, collective resilience, and maybe even hope?
That's a fundamental question for us all, I think, as we navigate an uncertain world.
We'd love to hear what you think about that question. Share your thoughts in the comments below. And if you found this deep dive into predictions and our fascination with them interesting, please give us a like.
It really helps us out.
It does. It helps us bring more explorations like this to you. And of course, make sure you're subscribed or following the deep dive so you don't miss our next exploration.
Thank you for joining us.
To close out this deep dive, we have a song that feels quite fitting for our theme of dreams and future prediction. It's called Yokimu,
Which translates to precognitive dreams, a perfect soundtrack for this topic.
We hope you enjoy it. And remember, when you give it a listen, put it on at 1x speed.
落ちむって本当にあるの未来を夢で見ることができるの科学じゃ説明できないことも時には現実になることがある表紙に書かれた大災害は2011年3月って言葉その年の東日本大震災で現実になった津波が街を襲い人々が逃げ惑うその光景を彼女は夢で見ていたんだそして今2015年7月にまた大災害が来るって彼女の予知夢が警告してるその内容が再び注目を集め人々は不安と興味を抱いている予知夢って本当にあるの未来を夢で見ることができるの科学 学的には予知夢は証明されてない。でも予言の自己成就って現象がある。信じることで行動が変わり、結果として予言が現実になる。心理学ではピグマリオン効果って言って、期待が人の行動に影響を与える。災害が来ると信じれば準備や警戒が強化されるかもしれない。予知夢って本当にあるの？未来を夢で見ることができるの？科学じゃ説明できないことも時には現実になることがある。でも注意しなきゃいけないのは予言に振り回されすぎないこと。冷静に情報を判断して自分の行動を決めることが大切。予知夢や予言に頼りすぎず、日々の備えを怠らないこと。防災意識を高めて自分や家族を守る準備をしよう。未来は誰にも読めないけど、備えることは今すぐできる。夢が当たるかは問題じゃない。動くことで未来は変わる。